Welcome back. Glad to see all of you. And Steve, since you have missed a couple of shows, you get the first question.
Sure.
We were talking about the Super Bowl before we came on, and Florida could be the Super Bowl of the presidential sweepstakes. How's that? Is that true?
It could be. I'm not so sure we're going to have quite the role we played in 2008. Just to refresh viewers' recollections, then Governor Charlie Crist endorsed John McCain 2 or 3 days before the primary at a big Republican dinner in St. Petersburg. McCain loved that endorsement. Crist was riding high at the time. Seems like a long time ago. And of course, McCain won Florida and won the nomination. The situation is much more muddled right now. You've got Mitt Romney out there running in the 20s. But a couple of things quickly to make the point about Florida. Number one, we've moved up the date of our presidential primary to January 31st to have a bigger role. We're the first really big state going. In fact, there are more electoral votes in Florida than the first 4 states combined. That tells you the role Florida plays. We're still, I call Florida an ATM for both parties. This is a major money magnet for both political parties to raise money. And there's been significant growth in the Hispanic voter base since the last census. Hispanics are going to play a much bigger role in Florida in 2012.
Mary Ellen, there's a big debate on January 23rd, about a week out from the primary. No one really has jumped out yet. You've got kind of a possibly 2-person race going on in Florida now, oddly enough, on the Republican side between Herman Cain, yes, and Mitt Romney. What are you sensing in terms of momentum in Florida for a Republican presidential candidate?
Well, I think, as Steve mentioned, Mitt Romney, which is pretty much the establishment candidate for a lot of the old line Republicans in this state, just can't seem to get past a 20% mark. So it's very interesting. We're seeing the second in line, surprisingly, is Herman Cain. But what we're going to see, I think Rick Perry is going to be staying in there because he's got the money. So he'll have the staying power to last through Iowa and New Hampshire. And when that happens, I think that will start narrowing the field. By that point, we'll see where Herman Cain is. And I think there's a very strong chance that Mitt Romney will have a stronger presence by that point when the Florida primary hits.
Brent, I see you nod.
I'm sorry, I meant Rick Perry will have a stronger
okay.
presence because of his establishment and because of the amount of money he's raising.
Brent, I think former Governor Romney is expected to do well in the first couple of primaries, right? So he would be presumptively at that point a real leader, right?
And in a way you wonder...
Iowa and New Hampshire.
Right. And if he does well in both those, and certainly if he'd win both, I think Iowa's more dicey for him than New Hampshire. But then you have to ask yourself, too, what's going to be left of that field by the time they get to Florida? Certainly, I think Huntsman and Bachmann are already have a lot of problems. They're going to go to Iowa, I'm sure, or they're going to try to, but their campaigns are having trouble. Herman Cain remains to be seen what type of campaign he has, but he's genuinely liked by Republican voters from watching the debates. And I think to give him credit, whether or not the 999 plan, or maybe it's 909 now, I'm not sure where it is, he has brought something into the conversation that's, for lack of a better word, I guess bold. He's said, hey, why do we need a $2 million tax code and a few other things, 2 million word tax code and a few other things that nobody else is talking about anything. So he's been fascinating to watch his evolution, I think, from a total unknown, mindful of Governor Scott once upon a time, not all that long ago. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. But I have to agree with the point you just made, Steve. I think if Governor Romney is successful in those early primaries, we may be looking at a field half the size of the one that's out there now.
David, let me ask you something. Is there a sizable anybody but Romney part of the Republican base? If so, who are they?
Yes, there is. And I think there's a couple of different directions that's coming from. I think there's a Tea Party element in the Republican Party that is anti-establishment, thinks Romney is too much of a moderate. He was the governor of Massachusetts, after all, which is about as blue as they come. He supported the health care bill there. He may or may not be soft on taxes in terms of where those people are coming from. So yeah, I think that's one element. And then it's difficult for pundits to talk about, but he's got a real problem with evangelical Christians, and that is because Mitt Romney is a Mormon. And there's a lot of a sense that, that's a religion that a lot of evangelical Christians think of as a cult. And, and that's an important part of the Republican base. So yes, I think there is an anybody but Romney movement. I think, if he's able to overcome that and get pretty far along in the primaries, I think it doesn't really matter at some point. I mean, the party eventually coalesces largely around the nominee because those same groups, particularly that Tea Party group, really can't stand President Obama.
Let me ask you this. In the final analysis, would a Romney presidency look a lot differently than an Obama presidency?
I think on a lot of ways it would look very similar. And that is, that goes to this point of a lot of sort of grassroots Republicans, Tea Partiers, not being big fans of Mitt Romney. I think that on a lot of issues, a Mitt Romney administration would look very similar to a Barack Obama administration.
You were about to say
Well,
something.
a quick point. A lot of the big money, I call more traditional Republicans, seem to be already lining up behind Romney here in Florida. I just don't see yet a leadership team they've announced, and some awfully familiar names to all of us that are dealing with politics every day are certainly putting their chips down, I think, on Governor Romney being successful in Florida.
Steve, let's talk about another candidate for president named Obama in Florida. What are your thoughts about how the president will do in Florida in any number of ways? Money, general election, etc.
I think he's got his work cut out for him. I think it's much more difficult for him now than it was 4 years ago, in large part because of this whole idea of the high unemployment rate, people hang that on an incumbent president. I remember going to a rally at Florida A&M University a few weeks, maybe a week before the 2008 election, and the standard bearer at that rally, as I recall, was Jill Biden, the wife of Vice President Joe Biden. And I saw a level of enthusiasm among college students and young people. Yes, most of them African American, not all. It was a very, very diverse crowd that day. And I had never seen that level of enthusiasm for a candidate before. And I don't think we're going to see it again. It'd be nice to see it again. I'm not saying that with regard to party. You want to see people really engaged in the political process. People are unhappy. People are, right now, they're kind of cynical about a lot of things. I think President Obama has a major undertaking to bring Florida back into the fold in 2012.
Mary Ellen, what's your analysis?
Well, I do think that this election is going to be something that, as Steve said, we don't have the enthusiasm factor. We've got people very unhappy. So it's going to mean who shows up on Election Day. And there have been a number of things that the Republicans and Democrats are anticipating because of this. I think they think that, just as we saw in 2010 with the governor's race, they think that the Tea Party movement is going to stir up people and bring people to the polls for Republicans. They think that this Occupy Wall Street phenomenon will also maybe bring people out to support, because they have nowhere else to go, perhaps the Democrat, perhaps Obama. But what they've done in Florida is something that I think is designed to influence turnout, in that they've made it much more difficult for people to vote early. They've restricted the polling hours for early voting, and they have established some parameters, and it's happening all across the country. Now these things are being challenged.
Defining they.
But I'm sorry, the Republicans in the last legislative session. So it's the turnout. It's all about the turnout.
Turnout, along those lines, I think the success or failure of President Obama to win Florida again in 2012, I think rides in part on enthusiasm in particular among Hispanics in Central Florida. And not just enthusiasm, but whether they register and whether they turn out and vote for President Obama. I mean, as Steve said earlier, there's been enormous growth in Hispanics in Florida since, there's been growth even since 2008. And whether, and these are not Cubans, you know, who typically vote Republican. These are Central Florida Hispanics, many of them Puerto Rican. Some of them are kind of swing voters, but they tend to lean Democratic. If they can get a lot of those people to come out and vote, he'll do well. If they don't, I think he will not do well.
I'd like to make a quick point about this if I can. I
ahead.
want to talk about one particular place in Florida that I think is crucial to President Obama, Jacksonville. Now, 2008, as I recall, John McCain won Duval County by this much, by a sliver. Well, that told Democrats right there that they were in the driver's seat, because it should not, Duval County should not be that competitive. That is a Republican stronghold in Florida, has been for a long time. What happened? They just elected an African-American Democrat as the mayor of Duval County. That's a major step forward for the Democrats going into 2012. You know, redistricting is going to have everybody in a tizzy about what the districts look like, but I come back to my point, which is I think Jacksonville, Duval County is a big, important battleground.
Brent, I wanted to ask you about something. You and I have seen a number of elections in our lifetime. I don't know if you sense this or not, but I sense that going into this election, there's about as much negativity and partisanship as I've felt, and in Florida as well as the nation. And there's vitriol. I mean, it's personal almost. Do you feel that?
Oh,
and if so,
absolutely.
why?
Well, I'm not sure I know all the reasons why. It started effectively the day Obama took office. It wasn't long after he was in office, and I think the senator from Kentucky, a Republican senator, said that his primary goal for the next 3 years was to make sure that President Obama was not reelected. I think you can go to the private sector sitting on trillions of dollars perhaps and say, why? Why aren't they participating in trying to get the nation back on its feet? There's a lot of different signs out there. There's a lot of big components, a lot of parts of this country that do not want to see him reelected. And of course, there's a consideration too. I think, there's a question at least in lots of people's mind if any of this has anything to do with race. You'd like to think this country's well past that.
We got to go to break. Thank you. We'll come back and talk about the United States Senate race in Florida.